Hi everyone, hope you're having a great Thursday so far. My name is Sarah Fairclough and I'm the Business Administrator for our Platform Solutions team at SmartSimple. Today we're going to be talking to you about changing your application forms. A couple housekeeping things before we get into the presentation. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar afterward within a week of the presentation, so just keep a lookout in your inboxes for that. And we are having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so feel free to post questions throughout. We just won't be answering them till the end. And now I'm going to pass it off to my host, Rachel.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Sloat, and I'm a Platform Solution Manager at SmartSimple. And today what we're going to be doing is going over some of the ways that you can maintain and update your fields on an ongoing basis. So the situation that some of us are faced with is that application forms don't always stay the same. So how can we update and maintain these custom fields without impacting previous application cycles and without causing, a number of other issues in the system? So we have a couple of different options that we can use when it comes to creating unique one-off fields or making sure that things are unique on an ongoing basis. So one option that we can use is our question set builder, or we can use a tool called versioning. So before I go into talking about the question set builder and versioning, one thing to keep note of in general is just the problem and where things start. So in SmartSimple, the way we can control the visibility of our custom fields, one way is by their type. And this can be useful in a lot of situations. You can just, permission certain custom fields to be available for certain types, well, not for others. But this, of course, has its limitations, because if you wanted to, say, make changes to any of those custom fields, regardless of which type they were visible for, that's going to impact the look of that field on previous records, and it's also going to impact the order that it's displayed in, or whether or not it is or isn't visible. So these two tools were created in order to help administrators who are trying to make changes to their fields, but where that type option isn't really going to help them enough when it comes to permissioning. So the first tool that we're going to talk about is the question set builder. And what it does is allows us to make unique one-off custom fields really easily by people that don't even have system administrator access. And those fields are only going to be visible on the particular associated records. So if we were going to create these questions on an award level, then the only fields that we're going to be using this question set field are going to be the applications that are submitted under that particular award. So it has its benefits and it has its limitations. The reporting capabilities using the question set builder isn't quite as robust as it is for normal custom fields. But on the other hand, it is easy to just quickly add fields to an application form on an ad hoc basis. The other tool that we have available is called versioning. And versioning is really powerful, but it also can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So where you want to retain application visibility and permissions on legacy applications, retain reporting capabilities on custom fields, and also make changes for future versions of your applications, that's where versioning can help. So it will allow you to make concurrent versions of your application forms. You can be working on a new version of your application while your current one is live. You can be working on your custom field set, getting it ready for the next time you want to have a call for your awards. But again, as I was saying, it is a bit more advanced in terms of its maintenance, because you do need to have system administrator access, and you need to still be able to understand that kind of matrix of field permission and visibility logic. So in order to kind of demystify versioning, I made a little diagram, because a lot of people think that when you are doing versioning, it's kind of like Word. So if we were writing an essay or a document, I might save it as version 1. And then I open version 1, I make some changes, save it again, it becomes version 2. In that kind of scenario, you're working from version to version to version, making the changes there. But that's not how the SmartSimple versioning works. It's more like a timeline. So you can think of your custom fields as your core field set. So those are the constant in everything. And that's where you want to be making the changes to update the visibility permissions. So when we start off by versioning our fields, we're going to make our core fields nice and lovely. And then we are going to take an initial snapshot of those fields. And then every entity that you are choosing to snapshot in your UTA is going to become version 1. So the kind of the delta and where people get confused is going from your first original version to your version 2. So we can say, 2019 to 2020. The place that you want to be making your changes is to your core field set, to your main pool of custom fields, not in the actual version. And once we get into the system, I'll show you that in detail. But that's kind of where some people get confused, and they start making changes to the actual version. And what happens is when they go and make a new snapshot, well, those changes only exist in that one version. The snapshot is always being taken of the core field set. So that way you can be having one version live and making your changes in the core field set without affecting everything. So again, the benefits for both of these tools is you're going to be able to make one-off fields. You're going to allow things to change from year to year and not affect things that were submitted in the past. So this is my demo instance. And the first thing I'm going to do is go into looking at how the question set builder works. So here in my award manager, where all of my individual award programs live, I am going to choose this record where I have the question set builder activated. And I'm going to go here into the configuration mode settings so we can just have a look at it. And what you can see here is that the question set builder is just a special field type. It's a field type that you will create mainly on your program level. So the program level would be where you would define what these unique questions are going to be. And then you would have a sister field on the application record. So that's where the actual fields that you're creating here are going to be visible. And what you can see from how this works is just by using the simple plus button, I'm able to pick different types of fields and different types of questions that can be rendered to our user when they are looking at their application. And the thing about this field set is that if I were to make another brand new award, this custom field set is going to be empty again. So that means that each individual award will have its own set of fields. So you will have to make them new for every application, which can either be a positive or a negative depending on how your questions work. So if you don't have a lot of questions that are of course going to be shared among programs, then this is a great option because these will all be unique for every child application of that award. So what I can do here is I'm just going to pick a couple. I'm going to do a radio button like dogs? And the options could be yes, they could be no. And I'm going to just take this one away and save. And I already have some applications that I have submitted under this program just to save a bit of time. And if I go ahead and open this application that was submitted to this program, under my application question, and I'm going to edit like I'm pretending to be my applicant here, you can see that those custom fields were just instantly visible on that application. So if I went back into my award record, I could delete those, I could keep adding fields, and they're just instantaneously visible on my application. And you don't have to go into configuration settings, add custom fields, things like that. They're just going to be visible on the child records of that award. So that's one way to do it. Again, the limitations are that the responses that you get to these questions, so what's my quest, do you like dogs, they can't be pulled easily into things like list views or reports. The way the system is going to look at these responses is they're going to see this. So if I added like 50 questions here, it's going to see all 50 of those as one giant custom field. So that's one kind of limitation in using this. But if the way your system is set up and the way you run your programs is, you just need to add like a random question here and there, you could use this to quickly and easily get those things up and running. The next one we're going to talk about, of course, is versioning. So what I'm going to do to get versioning going is I'm going to go into my global settings. So I haven't enabled versioning in this instance at all. So it doesn't exist yet, so you'll see it all from scratch. And here in the global settings menu, I have my smart versioning option. So this one I started working on, it didn't fill anything in yet. And I'm going to call this version 1. And what I'm going to do from here is pick which entity in the system it is that I want to create versioning for. So in this case, I am going to do it for my submission manager, where my custom field questions are living. And I'm going to pick my application. Now, one thing to take note of when you're doing versioning, as I mentioned a bit earlier, is the first time that you take a snapshot and enable versioning, all the applications in this whole entity are going to become version 1, which isn't a big deal because probably at this point in time, your custom fields are perfectly up to date. So they should be visible and living in exactly the way you want for the way your current cycles are operating. So I'm going to click take a snapshot, and yes, I'm going to create this as the baseline of our custom fields for this entity. So what's going to happen now is that when I go into my submission manager and I go into my applications and I pick one of my applications, you're going to see now an option in the corner here. So I have my core field set and I have my version 1. So if I go into my settings for my submission manager, what I want to do is actually activate that version that I've just created. So here we have our core field set and we have our version number 1, and I am going to turn this version on. So my version has been activated. So that means now that all of my applications are living and existing as my version 1. So if I want to go ahead and do that, delta between year 1 and year 2, what I'd want to do is when I'm editing my custom fields is go into my configuration mode, go to custom field settings, and if I pick one of my custom fields, you can see that we have options here in the corner to change between our core field set or our version. So this is going to show us the differences between that field between our versions. So if I wanted to go to my core field set and maybe change the caption of this field to awarding department, and save it, then what's going to happen when I take my new snapshot is that I'm going to, when I take my new snapshot, those changes will be rendered on new versions that I have. So the great thing about this is that you can smart version your level 1s, you can smart version your level 2s, and those actually happen separately as well. So if I go back into my settings for a moment here, into my smart version, you can see that I can pick more than one entity at the same time. So I could pick my submission manager again, and I could pick my activities. But best practice is, in a single version, don't tie your activities and your applications together, because then you kind of get into this cycle where every time you update one version, you're going to be stuck updating the other one as well. It's better to have them as two independent versions. So the thing about this feature is that it's really powerful because it's going to allow us to make changes on a year-to-year basis and not affect any of those legacy applications that have been submitted. If I were to go in and make a new version, we'll call this version number 2 and save it, and pick again my submission manager, pick my application, and take a snapshot. And go back into my application settings here. We have the option to select our second version. So say the new year rolls around, we've made all those changes in our core field set, we've made our new version. When we go ahead and pick version 2 and activate it, all of those applications that were currently existing as version 1, they're going to stay the same. They're going to stay as is. But any new application that comes into the system is going to live and be visible as version 2. So all of those custom field settings that we made are going to be reflected only in version 2. So obviously you can go into a lot of detail and intricacy on how to set this up and some of those caveats. I have some best practices when it comes to doing the versioning. So again, as a reminder, when you version everything for the first time, everything is going to become that version 1. Don't version your level 1s and level 2s at the same time, because as I mentioned earlier, you get into that cycle where they're dependent on one another for their visibility. When you're working on your core field set and making changes to the display order and things like that, always make sure that you're leaving enough room in between your fields. You do have the option, if you get into a pickle, to take any changes that you've made in your core field set, and as a one-off, you could push an individual field change into versions at will. But versioning doesn't always like it when you're changing visibility and when you're not leaving enough space. So always make sure, as best practice, to leave about 100 spaces of numbers in between your custom fields. When you're deprecating your custom fields, so in your core field set, like if you want to, turn some of them off, don't delete them, because obviously you, for reporting purposes, are going to be reporting out of your core field set. So do things like add them to a new tab, or add a description, add a label to them so that you know that they're like a deprecated field that you're not going to be using in the next version. And always make changes on your core field set. If you start changing things in your version, it's not going to be reflected the next time you take a snapshot, because that snapshot is only of your core field set. You can do a couple little moves as needs be, little one-offs to your version, but as best practice, just stick with making the changes in the core field set. Does anybody have any questions? Probably lots of questions, as I know that these are two very different ways of doing things. And again, versioning might be a bit confusing.
Yeah, we have some questions. Thanks, Rachel. Smart versioning affects at all levels of the UTA you select to version, for example, applications L1 and activities L2.
So yes, so you can do versioning in your level 1 or your level 2, but they don't have to be tied together. So when I made that version of my applications, that wasn't affecting anything related to my level 2 activities. So those can be versioned independently. I wouldn't add both of them to one version because again, then you get stuck tying them together. And for the most part, your level 2s probably won't vary too much from year to year, unless you're thinking maybe like a review form or something like that. But I would definitely version them independently.
Okay. How does versioning impact reporting? Can you do reports across versions and just some fields will be blank for one version?
Correct. That is the correct answer. So yes. So when you do the versioning and you are reporting from that, if you have some fields that are visible in version 1, they're not visible in version 2, and you're pulling that data set into a report, it just means that for certain records, depending which version is active, that field might just be blank in your columns. So list views, reporting, visibility conditions are all going to be driven from the core field set.
Will there ever be capability to version off of another version? As we go from year to year, the newest versions become the most relevant as compared to the core field set.
So that's where the actual setup and use of the versioning is important, because the core field set should reflect version 1. And then when you want to make your changes, so at this point in time, like my diagram, I'll go back to my diagram just because it's kind of relevant to this question. At this point in time, when you make your version 1, your core fields and your version 1 and your core fields are going to be identical. When you want version 2 to happen, the changes are going to be made in the core field set. So the core field set will always match your most up-to-date version because that's where the changes are always going to be pulled from.
Can you please repeat your tip about not tying the activity and application together in versioning? Are we show it again?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you're in your instance here, you can see, where am I? I'll go back into my global settings. So when I make a version, I can add not only my level 1, but I do have the option to add a level 2, or in a version, I could add something from a completely different UTA altogether. So the best practice is to not add your activities and your applications together in one version, simply because then every time you make a new version, you're kind of tying them together in that cycle of versioning. So it could be the case that maybe you want your review form to change once every couple years instead of every cycle of applications. So it's better to just treat them as independent items as opposed to versioning them at the same time. You can get elaborate with versioning conditions where the versioning can look at what the version number is of a certain parent entity and then decide what version number should be visible to the child. But for the most part, things like that can be alleviated if you just version those things separately. I see here, if an application is version 1, but the active version is version 2, will version 2 changes need to be copied to version 1 to show up? If an application is version 1, the active version is version 2. So again, the visibility of the fields and the changes are all going to be driven from the core field set. So from version 1 to version 2, the only difference between those is the changes that you make to your custom fields in the core field set. If you want something that is visible in version 2 to go retroactively back to version 1, then there is the option in the custom field settings. If I go here to my submission manager, and this is kind of something you would do on a one-off basis. Custom fields. You can see that you can copy things to other versions. Now, that would only be something that is done from the core field set to a version. So say, you know, in my core field set in version 1, it was called name. And in version 2, we called it, you know, first name. And we're like, actually, I've already made that active. I don't really want it to say first name. I could just go back and push that old change to my new version so that, you know, you can keep things congruent. But for the most part, you want to try and get everything in working order before you take that snapshot. Okay, so we have lots of questions, 11 questions. Are the question set builder fields available in the application PDF? I believe so, yes. I will have to double check that. I haven't made too many PDFs out of applications that are using the question set builder fields, but I will double check that and I will send that around after the webinar with the webinar details. Can you version level 3, 2, or just level 1 and level 2? It's just level 1 and level 2, as far as I am aware of. I am 99% sure it's just level 1 and level 2, but I will triple check that and include that with the last answer as well. So if we don't activate versioning when we create a new version, if an application is created, then it is associated to the previous version or the new version. Until you activate the version, then it's just going to be whichever one is currently active. So when I was going from version 1 to version 2, I can make my new version, take my snapshot, but until I go into the actual settings in the UTA here, and from my little drop-down menu, where I was, until I activate this one, everything is still going to be created and living as version 1. Can we create a new version in the backup instance and get an idea how it may work before implementing it in the live database? Yeah, absolutely. You can go ahead and test things out in backup. Again, with the way, unless you're on a dedicated server or if your server, you know, refresh time is different than the usual, you can go ahead, play around with this as much as you like in backup because it's going to be gone by the next day. So you won't hurt anything. And also you can delete versions as well. Try not to do that like in live and production because it can kind of mess things up for your applications. But definitely if you want to play around with it in backup, you won't be hurting anything. What happens if level 1 and level 2 have been versioned together for at least 3 versions? Should it be changed now or keep it consistent when next version is started? It's one of those things where that could be kind of a case-by-case basis. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you find that your application versions have to this point been very tied to the changes that you're making in your activities, it's been working so far, if you're happy to just keep them together, then by all means, go ahead. We'd probably have to look at it on an individual basis. I'm not sure if you've been having any issues with having them versioned together at this point, whether it's been a headache or whether you're like, oh, this doesn't affect me because I'm not actually making a lot of changes to my level 2s. If that's the case, then, you know, you can keep it as is. But if you're somebody who hasn't ever versioned the system before and you're new to this, then my advice would be not to do that. Is there any system performance issue if we make too many versions? For example, one per quarter of the same instance? Not that I'm aware of. They were set up and designed in order to, allow people to make those changes as much as they need to. The main things that, affect system performance are going to be, syntax and fields that are pulling variables and trying to calculate things and adding those to list views. But the versioning should be fine if you're doing it more often than just once a year. Also, if we create new programs in the dev instance and then T2P, test, and live, should we version from dev or from live? New programs in the dev instance and then T2P. That is another question that I'd need to double check, because as far as I know, the versioning, if you did it in your dev instance and pushed it to production, it should be fine. Like it should come through the same way the usual, permissions and fields and everything come through when you're pushing it into production. But I will double check. Because the thing is that it depends also on how you're using your dev and T2P. If you're using it, from your initial implementation and it's just the beginning that you're going to roll this program out for the first time into production, then there shouldn't be any harm in just making your versions in the live. Because again, until you actually activate the new versions and change the core field set, you're not going to be affecting anything. So you are able to actually work freely on your custom fields while one version is active and not affect anything, kind of the way we like it to work when you're doing it in dev to T2P, that you're not hurting anything live. When updating fields in version, is the best practice to update the core field set, push the change out to versions, or is it to make the changes directly to the field in a certain version? Again, core field set. So it is that timeline of changes. When you change things, it's just a snapshot of your core field set. So version 1 is just, it's like a photograph of you at a certain period in time. If you want to change your hair color, you're changing your own hair color. You're not going to draw with a Sharpie on your photograph. That's the weirdest analogy. I don't know where that came from in my head, but it's you are the real life core field set version in your instance. And anytime you make changes, the version is just a snapshot of that particular moment in time. If you usually copy an application form to create a new copy of the application and it carries forward some fields, when you are making the clone copy, you dictate that the child should be a new version. Okay, I think I understand the question a bit better now. That I'll have to double check with if you're just using the clone option to make all of your new application forms, because I'm not quite sure how that works in terms of the versioning if your original application was versioned a certain way. If an application is version 1, but the active version is version 2, will the version 2 changes need to be copied to version 1? Again, I think that we kind of already went through in terms of you're working from the core field set. So pushing unique changes can be done, but you're always going to be pulling from that core field set. Can you version from a version? No, always versioning from the core field set. Can you archive versions or hide the version from the version drop-down list? I do not believe you can archive versions. I think they always are available in the drop-down list.
I think we're good. But like Rachel said, if anybody does have any follow-up questions, you can always email us at businesssolutions@smartsimple.com and we can kind of go into further explanation there.
Yes, absolutely. And for anyone that had questions that I want to get a bit more clarification on, just to make sure that I'm not giving you the wrong answer, because obviously some of those are a bit more intricate than others. We will include those in the follow-up email with the webinar. And again, if you want any questions answered specifically about your instance or your use of versioning or anything like that, then we can do that one-to-one as well. You can email me directly or at Business Solutions as well.
Great. So we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.